Revenge Office Stories. My manager, Mark, leaned forward in his sterile, gray office chair, the very picture of corporate indifference. He steepled his fingers, looked me dead in the eye, and said the 5 words that would change everything. "You're just not valuable enough." He was talking about the senior strategist promotion, the one I'd sacrificed birthdays and holidays for, the one I'd pulled 60, sometimes 70-hour weeks to earn. Beside him, Brenda from HR, a woman who weaponized beige cardigans and a tight, fake smile, offered her own little dagger. She tilted her head, her voice dripping with phony concern, and asked, "And besides, why promote you?" What they didn't know was that in that cold, air-conditioned room, they weren't just rejecting my promotion. They were creating their biggest competitor. They didn't just question my value. They gave me the motivation to build my own empire. This is the story of how I took their dismissal and used it as fuel. This is the story of how I built my own dynasty, one of their clients at a time. The silence after their words was a physical thing. It pressed in on my ears, thick and heavy, drowning out the hum of the office. Not valuable enough. The phrase just bounced around my skull. I had single-handedly landed the quarterly anchor account, the very account Mark had just gotten a fat bonus for. I had mentored junior staff on my own time. My client satisfaction scores had been the highest in the department for 3 years running. All of it, apparently, added up to nothing. I remember looking at Brenda. As a 35-year-old woman in an industry obsessed with youth, I was used to the subtle digs and the patronizing tones. But this was different. This wasn't subtle. Her question, "Why promote you?" wasn't a real question. It was a statement that, in her eyes, I just wasn't the right fit. It was the voice of a toxic culture that cared more about politics than performance, a place where my dedication was just an expectation. I felt a hot flush of shame creep up my neck. The 3-page document I'd prepared, outlining every single one of my achievements, sat untouched on the table between us. I had rehearsed my talking points, my vision for the role, but the words died in my throat. You can't argue with people who have already made up their minds. Their decision wasn't based on facts. It was based on their perception of my worth, and they had just declared it bankrupt. I managed a tight, brittle nod. I think I muttered something like, "I understand." The lie felt like ash in my mouth. As I walked the long path back to my desk, I could feel everyone's eyes on me. The feigned concentration, the quick glances away. They'd all seen me walk into that office with hope. Now they were watching a ghost return to her chair. I sat down and stared at my monitor. For the rest of the day, I was a model employee. I answered emails. I updated spreadsheets. I even smiled. But behind that mask, a tectonic shift was happening. The shock and humiliation started to cool and harden into something else. A cold, quiet, diamond-hard resolve. The hurt was still there, but now it was surrounded by an icy calm. They thought they were telling me my worth. What they'd really done was give me permission to finally define it for myself. That night, sleep wasn't happening. I just lay in the dark, their words playing on a loop. Not valuable enough. Why promote you? With every repetition, the sting lessened and the anger grew. But it wasn't a hot, reckless anger. It was a cold, calculating fury. The anger of an engineer who sees a fatal design flaw. Their entire business was built on client relationships, and I was the architect of their strongest ones. They didn't value the architect, only the building. Fine. I would show them what happens when the architect walks away with the blueprints. The idea, when it finally hit me, was so simple and so audacious it took my breath away. I wasn't just going to quit. Quitting is an escape. I didn't want to escape. I wanted to win. The next morning, I walked into the office a different woman. On the outside, nothing had changed. Same blazer, same coffee cup. But inside, I was a spy in my own life. My desk was no longer a workspace. It was my covert operations base. My mission, to methodically dismantle the empire that had cast me aside and build my own from its ruins. First, I had to move from emotion to strategy. The first thing everyone tells you to do in these situations is to document everything. So I did. I spent lunch breaks and late nights creating a personal, encrypted folder on a thumb drive that never left my side. Into it went every praise-filled email from a client, every performance review that directly contradicted Mark's dismissal. I saved chat logs, project outlines I drafted that were later presented by others, and a detailed timeline of my achievements, complete with their monetary value to the company. This wasn't just for a potential lawsuit. This was my arsenal. It was concrete proof that I was, in fact, valuable enough. While my days were spent going through the motions, my nights were a whirlwind of creation. My small kitchen table became the headquarters of my own personal revolution. I drafted a business plan for an agency that would be the exact opposite of my current employer. Nimble, client-obsessed, and results-driven. No layers of middle management. No vanity metrics. Just pure value. I chose a name, Keystone. A keystone is the central stone in an arch that locks the whole thing together. It's the piece that bears the most weight, the piece that, if you remove it, causes everything to collapse. That's what I was to my clients. It was the perfect, defiant name. Next came the legal minefield. The fear of a non-compete clause was real. Was my grand plan just a fantasy that would get crushed by corporate lawyers? My next move was something I knew I couldn't handle alone. I found an employment lawyer, a sharp woman named Sarah. I laid out the whole story for her. The years of dedication, the stellar reviews, the dismissive meeting, and the potential discrimination. When I finished, she gave me a small, knowing smile. She called my non-compete clause aggressively vague and likely unenforceable, a standard document I'd signed years ago without a second thought. She explained that while they could try to fight it, most courts would see it as an unfair restriction on my ability to make a living. That was the game changer. The legal chains I had imagined were weaker than I thought. Then she gave me the most important piece of advice. They don't own your relationships, she said. They can claim their client list is proprietary, and you can't walk out with a spreadsheet of contacts. But they cannot stop you from contacting people you know professionally. The trust you've built, that belongs to you. That was it. That was the key. My value wasn't in their database. It was in the trust one had painstakingly built with my clients. Leaving Sarah's office, I felt a weight lift off my shoulders. The path forward was no longer a dream. It was a clear, executable plan. The company saw me as a cog in their machine. They were about to learn I was the operator, and I was about to walk away with the instruction manual. The following weeks were a masterclass in living a double life. By day, I was the diligent employee. I hit my targets. I nodded along while Mark presented strategies that came from my laptop. I listened to Brenda announce wellness initiatives that felt like putting a floral band-aid on a gaping wound. It was maddening, but every paycheck was now seed money for my new venture. My nights and weekends were a blur. I finalized my business registration. I built a simple, elegant website. I designed a logo for Keystone, a single, strong, angular stone. I was bootstrapping everything, fueled by coffee and a burning desire to prove them wrong. Then came the moment of truth. It was time to contact a client. My heart pounded as I scrolled through my personal contacts. I couldn't go for the biggest fish first. That was too risky. I needed a win. I settled on Client Alpha, a mid-sized tech company. I had a fantastic relationship with our head of marketing, a woman named Chloe. We'd bonded over our shared frustration with corporate red tape. I rehearsed the call a dozen times in my head. I waited until 7 p.m., long after my workday was over, and dialed her number, my hand shaking. "Chloe, it's my name," I said, my voice steadier than I felt. "Hey, what's up?" "Everything okay?" she asked. I took a deep breath. "Everything's great. Actually, I'm calling with some exciting news." I'm launching my own strategic consultancy. I didn't badmouth my old company. I just explained the vision for Keystone. A true partnership, direct access to me, and a relentless focus on goals without the overhead and bureaucracy. I was selling her a solution to every problem I knew she had with my current company. There was a pause on the other end of the line. For a terrifying second, I thought I'd miscalculated. Then she said, "Tell me more." We talked for an hour. By the end of the call, Chloe was practically finishing my sentences. "Honestly," she said, her voice a balm to my soul, "we work with your company because we like working with you. If you're the one at the helm, with no red tape, consider us your first client. Send the contract over." When I hung up, I didn't cheer. I just sat there in the quiet of my apartment and cried. It wasn't sadness. It was validation. It was the first concrete proof that Mark and Brenda were wrong. I was valuable. My worth wasn't a number on a corporate balance sheet. It was the trust of the people I worked with. That first win was the spark that started the fire. I poured everything into making Client Alpha a massive success, and Chloe became my biggest advocate. The next few months were the most grueling of my life. I was basically working 2 full-time jobs. From 9 to 5, I was a ghost in the machine. From 5 until 2 in the morning, I was the CEO of Keystone. I won a second client, then a third. Each time, the conversation was similar. I wasn't poaching them. I was simply offering them a better, more direct path to the results they wanted. The dominoes began to fall. I started hearing whispers in the office about clients leaving. There were hushed, panicked meetings behind closed doors. Mark started looking haggard. He'd walk past my desk with a strange, searching look, a mix of suspicion and confusion. He knew something was wrong, but he couldn't imagine that the not valuable enough woman sitting quietly at her desk was the architect of his company's decline. The exhaustion was bone deep, but every new contract was a shot of pure adrenaline. I wasn't just surviving anymore, I was winning. And right there, in the middle of the grind, with 3 clients signed and a fire in my belly, I felt a shift. I wasn't just building a company, I was taking back my power. If you've ever felt underestimated, if you've ever been told you weren't enough when you knew you were destined for more, do me a favor and hit that like button. It tells me I'm not alone, and it helps this story reach others who need to hear it. And while you're at it, subscribe because we're just getting to the good part. The tipping point arrived on a Tuesday. By now, Keystone had secured 7 clients. 7 significant clients who had all, one by one, terminated their contracts with my old company. The financial impact was no longer a whisper. It was a scream echoing through their quarterly reports. My phone rang. It was Mark. I let it ring twice before answering, my voice a placid, professional calm. "Hello, Mark." "My name," he started, his voice strained. "Just calling to check in." "I'm fine, Mark." "Busy," I said, letting the word hang in the air. The fake pleasantries crumbled. "I've been hearing things," he said. "Clients are leaving. Good clients. They're all giving vague reasons, but I hear a new name popping up. Keystone. You know anything about that?" This was it. "Keystone is a new consultancy," I said simply. "They seem to have a strong focus on direct client partnership and results." I was describing my own company to him as if I were a third-party observer. He was silent. I could almost hear the gears turning, the dawning, horrified realization. "Is it you?" he finally whispered. "Did you do this?" "Do what, Mark?" I asked innocently. "Build a successful business?" I thought I wasn't valuable enough to do something like that. I heard a sharp intake of breath. He started to bluster about lawyers, contracts, loyalty. I let him talk. His threats were empty, and we both knew it. I hadn't stolen a thing. I had simply built unbreakable relationships. But the real confrontation wasn't going to be on the phone. It was destined for a much bigger stage. The old company's largest, most prestigious client, Client Omega, was up for their biennial contract renewal. Losing them would be a death blow. 2 weeks after my call with Mark, I got an email from the CEO of Client Omega. He'd heard about the results Keystone was getting for other clients. He was intrigued. We met, and I laid out a vision for his company that was light years beyond the cookie-cutter service he was getting. I knew every one of his pain points because I'd been the one fielding his frustrated calls for years. I didn't have to tear my old company down. I just had to present a better future. He was sold, but he had one condition. He suggested an idea so perfectly, poetically devastating that I could have kissed him. He would invite me to the final renewal pitch meeting, not as a spectator, but as his new, chosen partner. The day of the meeting, I walked into the largest conference room at Client Omega's headquarters, and there they were, Mark, looking 10 years older, and beside him, Brenda, her beige cardigan pulled tight, her smile looking more like a grimace. They looked up as I entered, confused. Then the CEO of Client Omega walked in behind me, placed a hand on my shoulder, and said to the room, "Everyone, I'd like you to meet the new leader of our strategic marketing initiatives. Please continue with your presentation. I'm curious to see what will be missing." The color drained from Mark's face. Brenda's mouth opened in a silent gasp. They had to pitch their services to the woman they had deemed worthless, knowing she had already taken the prize. They stumbled through their generic, soulless presentation. When they finished, a painful silence filled the room. The CEO turned to me. "Anything to add?" I stood up. I didn't have a slideshow. I just spoke. I talked about their brand, their challenges, and their opportunities with a passion and intimacy that Mark could never fake. When I finished, the CEO stood, shook my hand, and turned to Mark and Brenda. "Thank you for your time," he said, the dismissal as cold and final as a tombstone. As they packed their briefcases in a stunned, humiliated silence, my eyes met Mark's. There was no anger left in him, just hollowed-out defeat. I hadn't just taken their clients. I had walked into their most important meeting and, with the client's blessing, erased them from the board. I had become their consequence. The fallout was immediate and seismic. The news that they had lost Client Omega ripped through the industry. The story of the undervalued employee who left and took half the business with her started to leak. Through the grapevine, I heard about the chaos. Mark was fired. His failure was too public to ignore. Brenda, the HR manager who had questioned my worth, was left to manage mass resignations. It turned out I wasn't the only one who felt undervalued. My departure inspired an exodus of other talented people. The company was forced into a painful restructuring, a shadow of its former self. My reality, in contrast, was explosive growth. The Keystone office, which started at my kitchen table, was now a bright, airy loft downtown. I had a team of 5 brilliant people whom I paid well and treated with the respect I had been denied. The most surprising part was that the burning anger I'd carried for so long began to fade. The revenge had been a catalyst, but it wasn't the destination. The true satisfaction didn't come from watching them fail. It came from watching my own creation succeed. My late nights were no longer fueled by fury, but by a genuine passion for the work. I had proven Mark and Brenda wrong, but somewhere along the way, their opinion of me became completely irrelevant. They were just a footnote in my origin story. The real victory wasn't seeing the defeat in their eyes. It was the moment I looked around my own bustling office and realized I hadn't thought about them in weeks. I hadn't just built a business. I had built a better reality. They told me I wasn't valuable enough. It was a judgment meant to put me in a box and limit my ambition. But value isn't something someone else gives you. It's not a title or a promotion. It's something you own. It's the trust you build, the skills you master, and the results you deliver. My journey started with a lot of hurt and anger. I wanted revenge, and I got it. But the greatest revenge wasn't taking their clients. It was proving that their definition of my worth was meaningless. The best revenge isn't seeing your enemies fall. It's rising so high you can't even see them anymore. For anyone out there feeling unseen or undervalued, please hear me. Document everything. Know your rights. The system might be flawed, but you don't have to be broken by it. Sometimes the most powerful move you can make is to bet on yourself. The door they close in your face might just force you to build your own, better entrance. They underestimated the wrong woman, and in doing so, they showed me the path to my own empire. Don't let anyone else hold the pen that writes your story. I want to hear from you. Have you ever been in a situation where someone tried to define your worth? Tell me your story in the comments. Let's build a community of people who refuse to be underestimated. Thank you for listening.